It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Evergreen, Washington, when 16-year-old Natalie Harper left her best friend's house, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Natalie was known for her bright smile, her love of photography, and her tendency to see the good in everyone. She walked the quiet streets with her camera bag slung over her shoulder, planning to capture the fading light on her way home. The streets were familiar, lined with towering pines and well-kept homes. Yet the tranquility of the town could not shield her from the darkness that would follow. That night, Natalie never made it home. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through Evergreen, a town that prided itself on its safety and close-knit community. Parents stayed up late, checking in with their children, while neighbors organized search parties, holding flashlights and calling her name into the night. Natalie's parents, Karen and Stephen Harper, were frantic. They had always trusted Evergreen, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and where the thought of such a crime felt almost impossible. But as the hours ticked by and Natalie did not return, fear began to take root. The police were called immediately, and Officer Daniel Kerr, a seasoned local investigator, arrived at the Harper home to take the first official reports. Karen's voice trembled as she described Natalie's last known movements, the clothes she had worn, and the friends she had spent the day with. Stephen, trying to stay composed, provided additional details, recounting her routine and anyone she might have interacted with. The officers began to canvass the neighborhood, speaking with friends, teachers, and anyone who might have seen her, while the Harpers clung to hope that Natalie would simply have wandered off or been delayed, unaware of the danger that had already begun to unfold. The initial investigation focused on the immediate area surrounding Natalie's disappearance. Officers checked the streets, nearby parks, and the local bus routes, but there were no leads. Witnesses remembered seeing a car parked unusually on a side street, but no one could provide a clear description. The search expanded to the surrounding forests, a vast area that could hide anyone from view, with volunteers joining in from the community. Flyers were posted at stores, libraries, and schools, and local media broadcasted Natalie's photo repeatedly, pleading for information. Days turned into weeks, and each unanswered question deepened the community's anxiety. Rumors circulated, some pointing fingers at strangers, others questioning those within Evergreen itself. Yet, despite the effort and attention, Natalie's trail seemed to vanish into thin air the first year after. Natalie's disappearance was particularly painful for her family. Karen and Stephen Harper were forced to navigate a constant cycle of hope and despair. Counseling sessions, both individual and family-based, became a lifeline, helping them cope with the uncertainty. Friends and neighbors tried to provide support, organizing vigils and memorial events, but the absence of answers left a persistent ache that could not be soothed. The local police continued their work, following up on tips, reviewing surveillance footage, and keeping Natalie's case active despite the lack of concrete leads. They maintained detailed records, hoping that even the smallest detail might one day unlock the mystery of what had happened to her. Years passed, and Natalie's case became one of Evergreen's most infamous cold cases. Officer Daniel Kerr, who had remained connected to the investigation, often reflected on the missed opportunities and the challenges of piecing together fragments of a crime that had left so little evidence. He worked with younger officers, teaching them the importance of patience and diligence in long-term investigations. Each anniversary of Natalie's disappearance brought renewed media attention, which in turn brought new tips, though most failed to produce actionable results. The town learned to live with the uncertainty, while Karen and Stephen clung to their daughter's memory through photographs, journal entries, and the occasional conversation with friends who remembered her warmth and curiosity. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. Nearly 3 years after Natalie had vanished, advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA technology, allowed detectives to revisit evidence collected near the locations where Natalie was last seen. Small items, once considered irrelevant or untestable, were sent to specialized labs capable of extracting genetic material that had previously been undetectable. Officer Kerr, now leading a cold case unit, personally oversaw the re-examination, determined to leave no stone unturned. The process was meticulous, involving repeated testing, cross-referencing databases, and collaborating with state and federal agencies. Weeks of careful analysis finally yielded a match, a genetic profile that had been in the system due to an unrelated minor crime. This connection reignited the investigation with a focus on a suspect who had, until that point, been overlooked. The suspect, Richard Callahan, was a long-time Evergreen resident known to some in the community for his reclusive behavior. He had maintained a low profile, working various temporary jobs and avoiding unnecessary attention. When law enforcement approached him with the findings, the evidence was overwhelming. Callahan's DNA matched material recovered from the scene near where Natalie had been last seen, and investigators quickly compiled additional proof connecting him to the timeline of her disappearance. The discovery stunned the town. Residents who had lived with years of fear and speculation were now confronted with the realization that the person responsible had been among them all along. The arrest was both shocking and, in some ways, a relief. Finally, the community could confront the truth. The arrest also brought a flood of emotions for the Harper family: relief, anger, sadness, and a sense of vindication mingled as they processed the news. Karen and Stephen were invited to observe part of the investigation and to hear the details of the evidence that had led to Callahan's identification. They learned how the forensic breakthroughs, combined with careful detective work and witness re-interviews, had built a case that would stand up in court. While nothing could undo the loss of Natalie or the years spent without answers, the arrest validated the family's persistence and the faith they had maintained in law enforcement's dedication to finding the truth, as Callahan was formally charged and held for trial. The town of Evergreen braced for the legal proceedings. Media coverage intensified, with national outlets reporting on the resolution of a cold case that had remained unsolved for years. Community members organized support groups and counseling sessions to help residents process the shock, understanding that many had been affected indirectly by the uncertainty and fear surrounding Natalie's disappearance. Schools held discussions on personal safety, awareness, and the importance of reporting suspicious activity, using Natalie's story as a somber but instructive example. The case became a catalyst for community education and prevention, turning tragedy into a tool for protecting future generations. The Harper family, while grieving, also began thinking about legacy and remembrance. They worked to establish a scholarship in Natalie's name, aimed at supporting students interested in photography and the arts, fields she had been passionate about. Memorial events were organized each year, celebrating her life rather than focusing solely on her death. Friends contributed to exhibits of her photographs, and local media documented these efforts to honor her memory. Through these actions, the community learned to hold on to hope and resilience, understanding that while justice could not restore the past, it could provide a framework for remembrance and healing. During the trial, Evidence and testimony meticulously detailed the events leading up to Natalie's disappearance. Callahan's behavior, patterns of isolation, and prior interactions were examined alongside the forensic evidence that had ultimately linked him to the crime. Witnesses recounted interactions they had with him over the years, highlighting subtle behaviors that, in retrospect, took on new significance. The jury was presented with a narrative that combined science, meticulous police work, and human testimony, demonstrating a comprehensive understanding of both the crime and its impact on the victim and her family. The proceedings were emotionally charged, but the weight of evidence left little room for doubt. As part one of this story closes, the Evergreen community, the Harper family, and law enforcement reflect on the resilience required to endure years of uncertainty. The arrest of Richard Callahan, while shocking, offered a measure of closure that had been absent for nearly a decade. The combination of persistence, advanced forensic technology, and community cooperation proved decisive in resolving a case that had once seemed impenetrable. Natalie Harper's life, her memory, and the impact of her loss continue to shape the town, influencing policies, safety programs, and the ways in which the community cares for one another. Though the pain of her absence remains, the triumph of truth and justice sets the stage for the story to continue, guiding Evergreen toward healing and hope. The arrest of Richard Callahan brought a mix of emotions to Evergreen. Relief and shock intertwined as neighbors and friends struggled to reconcile the quiet, unassuming man they thought they knew with the gravity of his actions. Law enforcement continued to maintain a strong presence in the town as the investigation deepened. Detectives meticulously retraced every step of Natalie Harper's last days, interviewing anyone who might have had contact with Callahan or witnessed unusual behavior during that time. For Karen and Stephen Harper, the days after the arrest were surreal. They had spent years imagining scenarios, fearing the unknown, and now the reality of the investigation finally intersected with their lives. While justice could not undo the loss, understanding what had happened gave them a sense of clarity they had never experienced before. Investigators reconstructed the timeline of Natalie's disappearance using old reports, witness statements, and physical evidence. It became apparent that Callahan had carefully avoided leaving traces that could be immediately linked to him. The forensic breakthroughs that had eventually led to his identification were the result of painstaking lab work and repeated testing of even the smallest samples. Items collected from wooded areas near where Natalie had been last seen, combined with his DNA match, created an unbroken chain of evidence. Police also discovered records indicating Callahan had interacted with Natalie prior to her disappearance, often under the guise of casual encounters in public spaces. These details, though seemingly minor at the time, took on significant meaning in light of the forensic evidence. Community response was intense. Evergreen had always been close-knit, but the revelation that a familiar face could commit such a crime shook residents to their core. Support groups formed for families of missing persons, and local leaders organized forums to discuss safety and prevention. Parents shared stories of their own children, recounting times when small decisions, walking home alone, staying late with friends, could have unforeseen consequences. Local media covered these developments extensively, ensuring that the story remained respectful while providing accurate information. The Harper family, while still grappling with grief, became advocates for awareness, speaking publicly about the importance of reporting concerns and trusting instincts when something seemed amiss. As the trial approached, Detectives worked tirelessly to ensure every piece of evidence was properly documented. Testimonies from forensic experts outlined the methods used to extract and analyze DNA from decades-old samples, explaining how technological advances had finally provided answers. Officers recounted interviews and surveillance from the original investigation, emphasizing the persistence and attention to detail that had kept the case active despite long periods without leads. Witness statements were carefully reviewed and cross-referenced with newly discovered information. Every piece of the puzzle contributed to the narrative that would soon be presented in court, demonstrating both the thoroughness of law enforcement and the inevitability of justice in the face of careful investigation. The Harper family prepared themselves for the emotional impact of seeing Callahan in court. For Karen, it was a moment of reckoning, confronting the person responsible for a loss that had defined much of her adult life. Stephen felt a combination of protective instinct and the need to remain composed, knowing that their presence and testimony would carry weight in proceedings. Friends and neighbors offered support, attending preliminary hearings and providing moral reinforcement. Counselors worked with the family to prepare for the emotional toll, guiding them through the process of recounting painful memories while maintaining the dignity of Natalie's life and legacy. During pre-trial hearings, more unsettling details emerged about Callahan's behavior in the years leading up to the crime. Neighbors recalled seeing him lingering near school grounds or following local teens. Actions that had seemed innocuous at the time but were now understood in a much darker context. Former colleagues described him as quiet and solitary, someone who could blend in without attracting attention. These testimonies, while difficult for the community to hear, painted a fuller picture of the suspect, illustrating the ways in which seemingly ordinary individuals could conceal extraordinary wrongdoing. The combination of witness recollections and forensic evidence made a compelling case for the prosecution. The trial itself was tense, with the courtroom filled to capacity each day. The judge emphasized decorum and the serious nature of the proceedings, while the jury listened intently to the detailed presentation of evidence. Prosecutors walked the court through the chronology of Natalie's disappearance, the original investigation, and the subsequent breakthroughs that had led to Callahan's arrest. Each forensic expert carefully explained the methods used to extract and verify DNA samples, illustrating how scientific progress had bridged the gap between past and present. The prosecution also highlighted Callahan's patterns of behavior, connecting them to the timeline and providing a clear narrative of intent and opportunity for the Harper family. Every day of the trial was a mix of emotional strain and cautious hope. They revisited memories of Natalie, recounting her daily routines, her laughter, and the small details that made her unique. Friends of Natalie testified about her kindness, creativity, and the deep connections she had formed with peers and teachers alike. These stories reminded the courtroom that Natalie was more than a victim. She was a young woman whose life had touched many. The emotional weight of these testimonies made the proceedings difficult, yet they also reinforced the importance of justice and the need to hold Callahan accountable for his actions. Outside the courtroom, the town of Evergreen grappled with the implications of the case. Community leaders met to discuss how to improve safety protocols, particularly regarding interactions between adults and minors. Local schools implemented awareness programs, teaching students how to recognize potentially dangerous situations and how to seek help. The story of Natalie Harper became a touchstone for discussions about vigilance, trust, and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Parents who had once assumed their small town was entirely safe now approached daily routines with greater caution, while still trying to maintain the sense of community that had defined Evergreen for generations. As the trial progressed, the defense attempted to challenge the forensic evidence, questioning the reliability of DNA extraction from old samples and suggesting alternate explanations for Callahan's presence in the area. However, the prosecution countered each argument with detailed explanations, reinforced by expert testimony and corroborating evidence. Additional witnesses were called, including former friends of Callahan who described behavioral patterns consistent with the prosecution's narrative. The trial highlighted the evolution of investigative techniques over time, illustrating how persistence, combined with scientific advancement, could solve cases that had once seemed hopeless. During testimony, the emotional impact on Karen and Stephen Harper was palpable. They described the years of uncertainty, the grief of not knowing what had happened to their daughter, and the small moments that kept hope alive, such as checking local media, following leads, and participating in memorial events. Their words resonated with the jury, emphasizing the human cost of the crime and the importance of delivering justice. Support from friends, neighbors, and counselors helped the family endure the emotional strain, providing a network of care as the legal process unfolded throughout the trial. The community observed the proceedings closely, many attending daily or following media coverage. Conversations in local cafes, schools, and homes reflected the collective processing of trauma, hope, and the desire for closure. Evergreen's residents experienced a complex mix of relief that the suspect had been apprehended, sadness for the years lost, and admiration for the perseverance of law enforcement and the Harper family. The trial became a defining moment for the town, illustrating both the vulnerabilities and resilience inherent in a close-knit community. As part 2 of the story closes, the trial is still underway, yet the path to justice is clearer than it had ever been. Richard Callahan's past actions are exposed, evidence is meticulously presented, and the narrative of Natalie Harper's disappearance is fully reconstructed for the jury. The Harper family, though still carrying the weight of loss, finds strength in knowing that their daughter's story is being told with care, precision, and respect. The town of Evergreen braces for the conclusion, understanding that the verdict will not only affect the immediate family, but also define how the community remembers Natalie and how it moves forward. The combined efforts of law enforcement, the judicial system, and the persistence of those who refuse to forget ensure that, after years of uncertainty, truth and justice are finally taking center stage. The day of the verdict arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation and apprehension hanging over Evergreen. Courtrooms were crowded, journalists lined the hallways, and townspeople waited outside, eager for news. Inside, the Harper family sat together, holding hands tightly, drawing strength from one another as the final phase of a decades-long ordeal unfolded. The prosecution had presented a compelling case, showing the jury how meticulous investigation and advances in DNA technology finally connected Richard Callahan to Natalie Harper's disappearance. Witnesses had recounted observations from the time of the crime. Forensic experts had demonstrated the validity of old samples, and patterns of behavior had been linked convincingly to Callahan. All of these pieces formed a mosaic of truth, leaving the jury with little room for doubt. The judge read the charges slowly, emphasizing their seriousness, and then excused the jury for deliberation. Outside the courtroom, tension was palpable. Neighbors and friends of the Harper family gathered, offering quiet words of encouragement and expressing hope that justice would finally be served. Evergreen, which had been shaped by the memory of Natalie's disappearance, now felt as though it stood at a threshold between decades of uncertainty and the possibility of resolution. For many, the trial had reopened old wounds, but it had also provided a framework for understanding, for seeing the full truth rather than living in fragmented speculation. Deliberation took several hours, each moment stretching the nerves of those involved. Karen and Stephen Harper sat silently, remembering moments from Natalie's life, replaying memories of her smile, her laughter, and the simple routines that had defined her childhood. Friends recalled her artistic talent, her quick wit, and her habit of helping anyone in need. Teachers spoke about her curiosity and determination. Each story reinforced the human dimension of the case, reminding the jury and the public alike that Natalie Harper had been more than a statistic. She was a vibrant young woman whose absence had left an irreplaceable void. Finally, the jury returned, the foreperson standing to deliver the verdict. As the words "guilty" on all counts echoed through the courtroom, an audible intake of breath swept through those present. Tears flowed, hugs were exchanged, and Karen Harper could hardly believe the moment had come. Relief washed over her and Stephen, tempered by grief that would never fully disappear. For decades, the family had carried the uncertainty of Natalie's fate, and now, while no verdict could bring her back, it provided validation of their faith that the truth would eventually surface. The sense of justice, delayed but not denied, became a balm for wounds that had been left open for far too long in the days following the verdict. The Harper family began the delicate process of reclaiming a measure of peace. They participated in community discussions about safety, using their story as an example of the importance of vigilance and advocacy. Evergreen's residents continued to grapple with the shock of the crime and the revelation that someone among them could commit such acts without raising suspicion for so long. Support groups grew, helping families of missing or harmed individuals navigate emotional trauma. And local law enforcement shared insights about investigative techniques that had been crucial in solving the case. The town collectively recognized that while the past could not be changed, lessons could be learned to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Richard Callahan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with approval by the Harper family, the prosecution, and many residents of Evergreen. For Karen and Stephen, the outcome represented a boundary, a definitive statement that the suffering inflicted upon their family would not continue unchecked. While Callahan's incarceration could never restore Natalie's life, it signified accountability, the formal acknowledgement that justice had been pursued with persistence and rigor. Their focus shifted gradually toward preserving Natalie's memory through acts of remembrance and advocacy, channeling grief into purpose. Memorial events were organized in Evergreen, bringing together family, friends, and community members. A small garden near the town library became a tribute space, with plaques, flowers, and photographs celebrating Natalie's life. Local schools incorporated lessons about empathy, safety, and vigilance, inspired by Natalie's story. The Harper family participated in these initiatives, sharing first-hand experiences and encouraging children and teens to trust their instincts and speak up when something felt wrong. This form of remembrance transformed the community's grief into proactive measures, ensuring that Natalie's legacy endured beyond the pain of her loss. Over time, media coverage shifted from trial updates to reflective features about the long process of bringing Callahan to justice. National outlets highlighted the role of DNA technology in solving cold cases, illustrating how perseverance and scientific advancement could break decades-long mysteries. The Evergreen case was cited in professional journals discussing forensic breakthroughs and the value of revisiting unsolved crimes with new methods for the Harper family. These articles offered both recognition and reassurance that Natalie's story would not be forgotten, that her case could educate and inspire others. Psychological counseling remained an integral part of the Harper family's lives, providing a space to process lingering grief and the emotional roller coaster of the trial. Karen and Stephen found that sharing their story helped others as much as it helped them. Conversations with parents of missing children fostered a sense of solidarity, highlighting the collective struggle faced by families navigating uncertainty and trauma. Community members who had known Natalie as a child also found closure, discussing memories and reflecting on the resilience displayed by the Harper family throughout the ordeal. Looking back, the investigation was a testament to the persistence of law enforcement and the relentless search for truth. Officers reflected on the challenges they faced in connecting old evidence with modern techniques, the painstaking work of reviewing archived records, and the importance of maintaining focus over decades despite dead ends. For the younger detectives involved, the case became an example of how diligence, patience, and scientific innovation could intersect to achieve justice, inspiring future generations to approach cold cases with determination and creativity. As Evergreen settled into a post-verdict reality, the Harper family continued to honor Natalie's memory in personal ways. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays were marked with reflection and storytelling, ensuring that her life remained a central part of family history. Friends who had grown up with Natalie joined in these acts of remembrance, sharing laughter and tears, and acknowledging the collective loss while celebrating the enduring impact of her life. The process of grieving became intertwined with a commitment to community and awareness, turning a painful history into a source of connection and learning. The conclusion of the trial did not erase the past, but it allowed for a new chapter for the Harper family and the town of Evergreen. Callahan's conviction reinforced the idea that truth could not be buried indefinitely, that persistence and dedication could overcome years of uncertainty. For the community, the resolution sparked conversations about trust, vigilance, and the complexities of human behavior, fostering a culture of support and awareness. Evergreen emerged with a heightened sense of resilience, having faced both tragedy and justice with courage and collective strength. For Karen and Stephen Harper, justice provided a measure of peace, though grief would always remain a companion. They continued to share Natalie's story publicly, participating in forums, interviews, and community programs to raise awareness about missing persons and the importance of forensic science in cold cases. Evergreen, once shadowed by the uncertainty of Natalie's disappearance, now carried the dual legacy of loss and resolution, reminding residents that even after decades, closure was possible and truth could prevail. The story of Natalie Harper, her life, and the pursuit of justice would remain a poignant reminder of resilience, the power of community, and the enduring impact of one young woman's life.